Chair of Policy Studies here at Mount Royal University. And we are very pleased to have this debate on parliamentary reform with two of the most known experts in this area in Canada. To my left is Senator Bert Brown, who is a prominent activist for a Triple E Senate going back into the 1980s, I believe. 1983, yes indeed. Was elected as a standby senator in Alberta and was later appointed to the Senate by Prime Minister Stephane. To my right is Stephane Dion, who is a current MP with the Liberal Party, former Liberal leader, have held a number of portfolios, including intergovernmental affairs and the environment, and prior to that was a professor of political science, and is well versed also on the topic of parliamentary reform. I couldn't be more pleased to be sitting in between them here today. So a bit of the structure of the debate. We will have a coin flip, not as prestigious as the Super Bowl, but it's a simple duty, it will work, to determine who goes first. Each of them will give an opening statement of around 15 minutes. Then there will be two separate rebuttals of 5 minutes each, followed by a question and answer period. Well, we're down to one mic. We started with 5, then we went to 3, we're now down to 2, but that's okay, we'll manage. We are going to time the responses at 3 minutes, which means try to keep the questions less than 3 minutes, and then we'll have some closing statements. We will be out of here at 6 because we need to break down the room, and there's a class at 6:30, which takes priority. So we will begin. I will do one of my few jobs as moderator. It's even bright and shiny. Who got to choose last night?
I chose the Queen.
So, Senator Brown, you can call it in the air. Oh, he wants the Queen. Yet, in fact, it's the balloon. So that means.
I insist on Mr. Dion going first.
Okay. So before we begin, I'd like you all to welcome our two speakers.
As I said, I chose the Queen, and I would have been pleased to give the priority to Senator Brown, because in the Senate we have seniority is a very important value. But okay, we'll start. We are here to discuss a bill which is C-7, which goal is to give a Senate that will be elected through a patchwork of voluntary held provincial elections, to have senators elected for a non-renewable mandate of 9 years. Why I'm against that? I think there is a law in political science that said the difficulties of tomorrow often are the result of the ill-conceived institutional reforms of today. And it is exactly what is at stake with this bill. There are 3 main reasons why I think it's a bad idea as a bill. The first one is that it will create a stalemate in the core of our parliament between 2 elected chambers that will paralyze each other. The second reason is that it would be terribly unfair for the 2 most western provinces of our country, Alberta and British Columbia. And the third reason why I'm against this bill is because it's a recipe to reopen a new round of mega constitutional disputes in a country that should be much more wise to focus on our challenges regarding the world economy and our social and environmental challenges as well, and to put all our priorities on that instead of starting again a constitutional dispute. Let me start with a quote. When I look at the problems in other countries like the United States and Europe, please tell me when I will be, that's 2 minutes probably, yeah? otherwise I would where political gridlock is over deficit crisis and debt crisis is leading to real economic uncertainty and political instability. We are very fortunate here in Canada. We don't have that. We have to make sure here that we continue to be able to make decisions and stay focused. Who said that? It was said December 8, 2011 by the Conservative House Leader Peter Van Loan, while trying to justify his government's record use of time allocation in the House of Commons to bully the House and to have these bills enacted as soon as possible. He said we cannot have the gridlock you have in the United States. Hello? What they will do with C-7? Exactly that. They will import in Canada the kind of gridlock you have in the United States. Ask to yourself on what exactly President Obama will campaign next fall. Will campaign on the fact that he had a good plan, but the Congress stopped him. That's what he will say. At least in Canada, we don't have that. And in Canada, at the time where you have so strong provinces, a very decentralized federation, it's important to protect the ability of our parliament to enact laws without to be always paralyzed by a gridlock between two chambers. The argument for electing the Senate is it's democracy. Parliamentarians should be elected. They have some, I understand the view and I share this view. Except that the fathers of our confederation, I have the quotes, if you ask me to find them, I will find them easily. Whether it is George Brown or John A. Macdonald or George Cartier, we're aware of it. We're aware of the fact that it may be good to elect two chambers. They purposely decided to not do so because their view was that the Civil War in the United States has been mostly caused by this kind of fights between elected chambers. And in order to avoid that, they decided that they would have one chamber elected and one appointed. So this is the purpose we had at the beginning, to avoid to have two elected chambers, to have a gridlock between each other, disagreeable bills, and so on. We need to realize how much our Senate of today, in the Constitution, has the same powers than the House. The same powers, with some differences. When we come back to that, if you ask me, I would give that. But roughly it's the same powers. If the Senate of today is not blocking the House, contradicting the House, amending bills, yes, but not vetoing the bills most of the time, it's because senators are not elected. They will give good advice to the House, they will come with sound amendments, there will be the second thought chamber, but at the end of the day, they will give the last word, the ultimate word, to the elected chamber by the Canadian people, the House of Commons. I have a study here. Between 1994 and 2008, the Senate amended 9% of the bills, which is quite substantial, 9% of the bills. And they rejected only 2 out of 465 bills. 2 out of 465. Ask to yourself, if the senator had been elected, they would have rejected what? 25%? 50%? More? We don't know, but we know what is happening in Mexico, in the United States, where you have these two chambers that are blocking each other. I don't see why we would import in Canada this kind of problems. Right? Enough problems like that, we don't need to add an additional one. If you look at all the federations of the world, Professor Wonwatch from Queen have done that. All the democratic federations of the world made sure that we have a dispute settlement mechanism between their two chambers. All of them. In Canada, we have one. It is that senators are not elected and give the last word to the House. The moment they are elected, we'll not have anymore a dispute settlement mechanism. Let's say in the United States, they have mediation committees. It doesn't work well at all. In Germany, the equivalent of the Senate, the Bundesrat, has only a capacity to veto bills when it is linked to lender jurisdiction. In India, it's only a suspensive veto, and so on. In all the federations that are parliamentary systems, like the one we have, the chamber where the government is responsible, that means the chamber that may defeat the government, the chamber of confidence, which is the House of Commons in Canada, has more power than the other chamber. So in Canada, if we want an elected Senate, we need to fix the problem of the dispute settlement mechanism. We need to clarify the powers of the House and the Senate. If we don't do so, it's completely irresponsible and dangerous for the country. Dangerous for the country and unfair for Alberta and British Columbia. Why? Because this country has been built east-west. And the number of seats you have in the Senate of today is the result of this history, and not at all the correspondence of the demography of today. That means that Alberta and British Columbia have 6 senators out of 105 senators. 6 out of 105. A province 5 to 6 times less numerous than Alberta or British Columbia, New Brunswick, has 10 senators. Because in 1867, New Brunswick was already a dominion of Canada, a dominion of the British Empire, while Alberta and British Columbia were not as advanced as societies. So it's why Alberta has 6 and New Brunswick 10. Today it's a problem for Alberta and British Columbia. But since the Senate is playing its role with moderation, it's not as big as a problem as if the Senate was a powerful body. The very moment the Senate is a powerful body, as powerful as the House, if not more powerful, I think it will be terribly unfair for Alberta to have only 6 Albertans in this important chamber of the country. So you will tell me we just have to add seats for Alberta, but we cannot do that because it would not be constitutional. The Constitution said that in order to change the character of the Senate, and the Supreme Court of Canada confirmed it, you need to have the agreement of the provinces. So the powers, the number of seats, dispute settlement mechanism, all these kind of things, you need to have the provinces at the table. So we cannot do that by an act of parliament. This bill, C-7, is unconstitutional. And Premier Charest, one of the premiers, have said, and Premier McGuinty is very close to say the same, that he will go in court. I think he will have a strong case in order to make this bill this act as unconstitutional. So we go, it's my third point, I don't know how much I have still. 4 minutes, I have a lot of time. We go right away to a constitutional fight when we don't need it. We don't need it at all. The Senate of today, of course, is not an elected one. But when you look what the Senate is doing, the Senate is quite close to what the fathers of Confederation were looking for. A chamber of silver second thought, a chamber of amendment, amending the House, the scrutiny, making research for the Parliament, for Canadians. And these senators, most of them have been wisely chosen by the Prime Minister. So among the list of difficulties we may have, I would not put the Senate very high in this list. I have many other challenges I would like our country to face than to have this dispute about the Senate. The election scheme, the way we would elect senators, is a complete mess in this bill. In order to try to make the bill constitutional, the Prime Minister decided that it would not be elected by Ottawa, by the federal law. He said it will be for the provinces to do so if they want. So some provinces may do it, others don't. So you will have some senators elected, others that will be not elected. Provinces will have to pay for these federal elections. Many of them said, I don't want to pay the bill. Don't want to pay millions of dollars to elect senators when it is the federal duty to do so. Provinces have different rules to elect MLAs. Some provinces, as you know, will request the limit of spending. Some don't. Some provinces don't allow to have spending coming from other provinces. Others do, and so on. So you will have senators that will be elected following different rules. Some provinces have said they don't like what happened in Alberta when you have at the same time an election provincially and an election for senators. They think it will be confusing. They want their people to focus only on provincial election and provincial issues when there is a provincial election. They don't like the US system when you vote for a lot of things at the same time. They prefer the Canadian system. When you vote provincially, you vote provincially. When you vote for the municipality, you vote for the municipality. And these issues are in your mind, and you don't mix up with others. They have said they don't want that. So you see the kind of mess we are creating now. A Senate, when you look in Australia, in the United States, an elected Senate, at the end of the day, mean too often the duplication of the partisan fights you have in the House and the ideological polarization you have in the House. I don't think it's something that would help our federation to work well. We have enough of these partisan debates in the House. We don't need a second elected chamber to duplicate it. To conclude, I think I may conclude right now, I think as Canadians, whether we are conservative, liberals, and DP from the west, the east, in English or en français, we should say no to build C-7. It's a bad idea. It will add an additional problem to Canada. We don't need it. Democracy doesn't mean necessarily two elected chambers that are duplicating and fighting each other. If one day we may conclude about an agreement on the number of seats by province, that would be fair for all the provinces, including Alberta. If we may find a dispute settlement mechanism and a sharing of the powers between the two chambers, that would make sense. At that time, we may come with a constitutional amendment that will make it true. But to come unilaterally by a federal law that would be unconstitutional, that have no dispute settlement mechanism, no clarifications of the powers between the two Senate, is a terribly bad idea, terribly wrong for Alberta, British Columbia, and the whole of Canada. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
Mr. Brownsy, I would ask if you could pass one page around to everybody in the room. I accept the woman at the far back on that aisle. That's my wife, and I think she's heard me talk before. It's a page and a half, and it is the plan for reforming the Canadian Senate. It's a page and a half. It's you only give them one page. I'm sorry. It's on the back of the page that you're handing out. I will say a few things before I read that for you, so you can follow every word that I say. And I would only say, first of all, with the Constitution Act of Canada, and I had to get a new book because the old one was getting a little duller, so I got myself a brand new Constitution Acts of 1867 to 1982. At the very top of the page, it says representation of provinces in Senate. And then it goes down by a large paragraph, and it numbers the number of senators that should be representing each province. And it does say represent. The only way you can represent people is if you have a vote. We have no intention to take away what the Senate does now, which is to have a sober second thought. It's had a long time. What we want to do is improve it so that it can not only have a sober second thought, but it can have a vote. And when we get to where you've all had a chance to either hear me on this page or read it, you'll realize that we set it up so that there will be no gridlock from the Senate. The Prime Minister told me a couple years ago, I believe, he said, we need a thing to prevent gridlock. And so I've had a couple of constitutional issue people that have helped me for over 20 years now. One is Dr. David Elton, who used to be head of the University of Lethbridge, and is a poli-scientist, and also Peter McCormick, who is still head of the University of Lethbridge. And so we're calling the point where we keep making sure we don't have the gridlock, we're calling it the Elton-McCormick override. What it really is simply the constitutional parameter for having a constitutional amendment. You have to have 7 provinces out of 10 representing 50% of the population. That's the only way you can have a constitutional amendment. We have had 2 constitutional amendments in this country. The first one, I don't remember whether the first one actually was Quebec and languages, French and English, or whether the first one was the thing in Newfoundland, Labrador, where they wanted to split up religious schools, Protestant and Catholic. Those were single issues, and we didn't have anyone complaining about having a single issue and not having a lot of other things brought into that constitutional amendment. I was an advisor to 5 provinces in '92 when we had the one in I lost it for a second there. It's Prince Edward Island is where the constitutional amendment finally went to. It started out in Ottawa, of course, and became a Charlottetown Accord when Mulroney took all the powers away from the Senate. We had agreed completely on 6 senators per province, and I was advising Harcourt in BC, Don Getty in Alberta, Devine in Saskatchewan, and Philman in Manitoba, and finally Clyde Wells was then the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. So we have deliberately designed this plan to make sure there's no gridlocks. We've decided to make sure that there is no change to what the ability of the senators can do. We've also made sure that in that paper there is a vote, but that the vote will not cause a vote of confidence in the government. We've also used the clause of the 7 out of 10 representing 50% of the population. We used it twice on that piece of paper. And when you get to the back, you'll find there's a paragraph in there that says if there is a vote and we haven't changed the number of senators in each province through a constitutional amendment, every province will just have 1 vote when it comes to vetoing a bill. That may sound a little funny, but that's exactly what happened in the constitutional amendment that we had in Charlottetown. Actually, the premier of that province of Ontario was actually Bob Rae. And Bob Rae said to the other members of the thing, he said, why should I give you guys some extra of my senators? And Philman said, well, sounds a little bit like the animal farm to me. Some pigs are more equal than others. And all of a sudden it caved in and we had 6 senators per province. We don't really care on this constitutional amendment that we want whether they change the numbers or not. It would be very nice if all the provinces agreed again we should have an equal number. But we don't need it. The second amendment thing that is 7 out of 10 representing 50% of the population, the only way Bob Rae was able to vote in that constitutional amendment in Charlottetown was to prove that he had a majority of his MLAs behind him, and he had 1 vote. Getty had to prove he had his government behind him, they got one vote. PEI had to do the same thing. So what we said is if you have 24 senators from Ontario or Quebec, you have to show that 13 of your senators are mad about the bill that you're trying to have changed or vetoed. And if you have a majority, then you can vote once. In every other province, Alberta would have to have 4 out of 6. PEI would have to have 3 out of 4. In Atlantic Canada, you'd have to have 6 out of 10. So then you'd be able to veto the bill or make the government change it and not bring the government down. So the primacy of the House of Commons would always be there. And we'd still be able to defeat a bill, and their choice would be to fix it because there's 7 provinces out of 10 that think there's something drastically wrong with this bill. I'll give you one example of how drastically you can have one and how the Senate actually fixed it already. And that was when Brian Mulroney came in with 11% GST. And he said, this is what I want, and the people of Canada went ballistic. They went in every province, they were calling, faxing, yelling at their MPs, telling them you'll never be reelected. Never if you go with 11% GST overnight. And so he said, okay, I'll go to 9%. And then you guys and gals as MPs can either sit down and shut up or get out of caucus. So then the people of Canada said, well, we're still mad and we still want change. And so they went after the Senate, not realizing, I think most of Canadians, that you can't get rid of a senator. The only way you can get rid of a senator is if he commits or she commits a very felonious crime or swears allegiance to another country. That's 2 of the ways you can get rid of a senator. Otherwise, you have to wait until they're 75. So all we're saying is we want to be able to express ourselves in the Senate with a vote. And what actually finally happened out of that effort was that the Senate people did everything they could to stay at the podium. They did a filibuster. Now, I don't know if they ever did one before or after, but I know they did this one. One guy was playing a kazoo. I don't know what a kazoo is. Maybe there's somebody in the audience that knows what a kazoo is, but it's some kind of musical instrument. Another guy was reading recipes. Every day he read different recipes. And the last fellow was smarter than everybody. He had written a book in English. And he decided he'd read a chapter every day, a different chapter. So he got automatic translation because that happens in the Senate all the time. So he got his book published in both languages, didn't cost him a dime, and he sold it to a lot of people. I'd like to skip through this very slowly. How much time do I have left? I'm not going to give you every word for word, but I'll give you the titles. It says it's time to seize the moment and reform the Senate. It's a time when Canadians can express themselves and actually have a vote in the Senate. The Senate vote is equal to the House of Commons, believe it or not. Right now, without any changes, the Senate can veto a bill. And there's a senator, former senator there, and there's one up in the top. If they want to disagree with me, then I'll have to give way. But they can veto any bill coming out of the House of Commons right now today. The only reason they don't do that is because they don't have the weight of the people of their province behind them. And the only way you can do that is to be an elected person. That takes me all the way down to where we talk about the first 7 out of 10. And that is designed specifically to have a constitutional amendment. And what we're saying is we want a single constitutional amendment. We went through an awful lot of days and an awful lot of work in Charlottetown. And we got nothing out of it. We had equality, but they brought in questions about issues for Quebec, they brought in gender issues, they brought aboriginal issues. And when we got through that thing, it was about an inch thick, and 9 provinces out of 10 voted against it. Not because they were against Senate reform, because they had something in there they were upset about. I'm not saying there wasn't anybody that didn't think they wanted to vote against Senate reform, but I'm telling you, not 9 out of 10 provinces, because we've been hearing from provinces again and again. We now have 4 provinces that actually have this kind of legislation, and they're happy with Bill C-7. C-7 to begin with is not challenging. It's an offer from the Prime Minister to allow you to vote. It is not a command, it is not a law, and it won't be. It's simply an offer by the Prime Minister, and then at the body of it, it is the connection or the skeleton of what Alberta has used 3 times in 20-some years to elect senators. So there's nothing in there that's challenging. Quebec has said, they said they were going to challenge us 20-some years ago. They said they were going to challenge us 6 or 8 years ago. They said they're going to challenge us now. The Supreme Court would laugh them right out of the thing until they say, this is an offer. This is not a law. They don't have to do this. There's no way we can have a constitutional reference on something that is not a law. Half of the provinces they don't want to elect, they don't have to. Those that want to can, and he will respect the outcome. That's all I have to say for now. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll now go into our rebuttal phase, a series of 5 minutes per speaker. So we'll begin with Mr. Dion.
No, I have a computer set up.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dwayne. Thank you, Senator. I think we need to have a very clear view. There are two texts that Senator Brown discussed, but he did not clarify if he was speaking of one or the other one. One is C-7, and the other one is his letter that you have on your knees. And it's not the same. C-7 makes 2 things. C-7 said, provinces may, if they want, have elections for senators for 9 years, non-renewable. So you don't think the Prime Minister of Canada must consider. That's what C-7 does. C-7 does not address the powers of the 2 chambers, does not clarify what would be a dispute settlement mechanism, and doesn't change the very odd distribution of seats by province. To elect a senator, if it was an elected Senate, since Alberta has 6 senators out of 3,700,000 people, you would need 625,000 voters. In New Brunswick, only 75,500 voters. C-7 does not fix this problem. So whether we say it's fine with us, it's fine that Alberta is not underrepresented, it's fine that we'll have 2 chambers elected without clarification of their powers, one facing the other. Whether we say no, it's not fine, it's a problem. And I think Senator Brown is saying it's a problem. But he's saying, and then comes the second text, is that we'll have constitutional amendments to fix that. He's proposing that the Senate, in order to veto a bill of the House, instead of doing it by simple majority, we need to reach the 750 rule, senators coming from at least 7 provinces, representing 50% of the Canadian population. It's what he's proposing. He's proposing to have an equal Senate by number of seats, the same for each province. C-7 does not do that. Senator Brown cannot accept the reality that C-7 will create. Senator Brown is telling us we'll change the Constitution after. Now, a question, why New Brunswick would accept it? The very moment you make the Senate a powerful body, why New Brunswick would accept to be less than they are today? When, in fact, every census increased the number of MPs coming from Alberta in the House of Commons. So I don't see how Senator Brown will negotiate in order to negotiate a constitutional change that will fix the wrong that would have been created by C-7. It's why we should be against C-7.
Okay. Thank you. We'll let,
Thank you. I have excerpt from the Constitution again about term limits. Term limits happens to be the one thing that you don't need Parliament even to decide whether they want to change the term limits. It's an anomaly, I know, but they used to be for life. And then the Prime Minister of the day had heard enough comments about people that were, living until 90. One of them actually was brought in on a gurney, was legally blind and legally deaf, and they just were collecting the money. I'm not saying that's bad, because, she had a legal right to have health care, which we don't have at that time, but all I'm saying is that that's one of the things that triggered it, and Parliament changed it down to 75, and there was no vote by any province in it. It's in this document here if anyone wants to see it. I didn't make copies of everything that I know. And what I have to tell you about C-7 is, I know it's an offer to the provinces. There's no command in here that they must do it. You get a copy of C-7 is on the net, so just get a copy of it and read it, and find it for me and tell me that it now says that they absolutely must have an election, and they absolutely must have the Prime Minister pick the winner. It's not true. It's not in this bill. It's not in the wording. So get a copy of that. A couple of other things I'd say is, first of all, I really believe in democracy. I lost an uncle in World War II. And in Afghanistan, I had a nephew that was in Afghanistan. And he had a squad. He was a lieutenant. And 2 American fighters dropped a bomb on his squad. They were practicing night fighting, and they were using flare shells. And these 2 fighters came back from American sorties, and they thought they were being fired upon, so they dropped a bomb on him. It killed 4 of his men. It knocked my nephew cold for an hour or so. He spent the rest of the night trying to save the rest of his men. There were 8 of them that were injured. So I think democracy is everything as far as I'm concerned. I don't think anybody should be able to just pick somebody that represents, 9 million people in Ontario, represents how many million people in Alberta? There's 1 million in 2 of our cities. I don't know the exact, I think it's 3.75 or something million in Alberta. One person should decide who represents them from now on? I don't think so. Thank you.
thank you. We'll now go on to rebuttal stage number 2.
Yes. I'm very proud, and all of us are very proud of our brave men and women in uniform who fought for democracy around the world. We must be very proud to be one of the 2 rare countries that never sent its army abroad for their reasons to defend peace and democracy. Very proud of that. But he didn't fight to defend 2 elected chambers. Most democracies don't have 2 elected chambers. And none No democracy have two elected chambers with the same powers and with no dispute settlement mechanism between them. And no democracy has an elected chamber that will be as unfair for Alberta and British Columbia as the one I just gave you. C-7 does not fix it. Senator Brown's proposal is a proposition to fix it. Is it a good one or a wrong one? I would suggest that provinces should be at the table. It should be negotiated with all the partners of the Federation, not by Parliament alone. So I wanted to make this clear. What is at stake is not are we Democrats or no. Everybody in this room is Democrat, I'm sure. The issue is, can we have a parliament that makes sense for Canada and makes sense for Albertans? This is the issue. I made my point very clearly. I did not receive any answer from now. I think C-7 does not address these answers. And if we want to address it, we need to open the Constitution. With no guarantee at all that the other provinces will want to give something to Alberta, once the Senate will be very powerful. No guarantee at all about that. So what are we doing? What kind of game are we playing about our country? I think it's wrong.
Thank you. Senator Brown.
Yes, I'm thinking real hard here about whether there's anybody with two chambers. Seems to me I heard about a country called Down Under, and then somebody tried to call it Australia. They have two equal chambers now, and they have had gridlock at times because they didn't put the mechanism in that makes one of them superior to the other. That's exactly what we've done. We've said that one person, one vote in each province gives them the right to be members of parliament and to be primacy in their province. But the other chamber, the chamber of sober second thought that we depend on to do something about mistakes, has a vote to make sure they can do that. They either fix the bill or they can let it die. It's not going to hurt this country one bit if some bills die. In fact, that's what happened to Mulroney when he asked for 11%. It died twice, and then it came back as 9%, and everybody voted for it. We want them to be able to do that. We don't want people to have to play kazoos and read recipes in the chamber to get something done. They need to be able to get a vote. They need to have 30 days dead on, 30 days, not with holidays or anything else, but 30 days. If you want to vote against a bill in the Senate, you've got to have a majority, first of all, and you've got to do it in 30 days. We don't care if it's a holiday or what. If you're sincerely worried about this bill and you really want to get something done, then get a vote and vote it down and tell the chamber, the upper chamber, or no, the lower chamber, I'm sorry, to go ahead and fix the bill. Listen to what 7 provinces in the country have said is wrong with this bill. And my opponent here has talked about whether or not it's fair for somebody to have so many votes in PEI and so many votes in Ontario, and there's a comparison. Well, let me tell you, you know, there's only so many votes that elect 4 MPs in PEI right now, and the number of MPs that come from Ontario aren't complaining that PEI gets 4. You know, why would you complain? It's a much smaller province. They've got very few people to vote by comparison, but they have a right because they are a provincial government. And the provincial governments have always been allowed to have certain privileges. That is provincial taxation, health care, immigration. I could go on and on. There's about 6 of them. What happened in this country was when the federal government decided that they could take more tax money than they needed, and then they could put up a program for health care and any other thing they wanted to, and then go to the provinces and say, hey, if you don't do what we want you to do in terms of health care or immigration or anything else, we're going to take your share of the money and keep it. We're not gonna give it to the province. You want an example on that? The best one was when Chrétien wanted a debate with all of these provinces. And he said, we'll give each premier 5 minutes to speak. They were all in the chamber, and one of them spoke for 5 minutes, another one spoke for 5 minutes, and Ralph Klein had just gotten started on his, and Chrétien says, take it or leave it, and left the room. And Ralph Klein went to the casino in Windsor. That's what you get when you don't have a vote.
Thank you. We'll now go into our third stage and final stage of the rebuttal phase.
Thank you, Dwayne. Well, whether we think it's fine to increase by far the number of bills that the Senate will veto or reject. As I said at the beginning, the ratio now is about 2 out of 450. With the Senate elected, an elected Senate, you may think it will be 100, let's say, or 150 out of 400. Is it okay or not? I suggest it's not something that Parliament may decide on. The Supreme Court of Canada has said if you change the character of the Senate, provinces must agree. We are changing the character of the Senate by this bill. The fact that elections will be voluntary and not compulsory doesn't change the fact that we are changing the character of the Senate by this bill. It's why the Supreme Court is very likely to say that the bill is unconstitutional. And I think it's right. We are a federation. We cannot change the character of a common institutions of Canadians if you don't have the partners of the Constitution at the table. The same about the number of seats. Senator Brown will have to decide today. Is it okay for Alberta to be so much underrepresented or it's not? I understand by his letter that it's not, and he wants to fix it. C-7 does not fix it. C-7 will create a powerful Senate where Alberta will be marginalized. This so powerful province of ours will have only 6 out of 105, which is the case today. But today the Senate is playing a moderate role. The moment the Senate will play its full constitutional role, I think Albertans will wake up and will ask Senator Brown, to Prime Minister Harper, to Minister Upal, the minister from Edmonton, what have you done to your province? I may be wrong. Tell me where I'm wrong, because up to now, they did not receive an answer. I'll conclude on the case of Australia. Senator Brown mentioned the case of Australia. Precisely. In Australia, first, they have a number of seats by states that is equal. That's what Senator Brown would like to see. But you don't have a state that is completely underrepresented. They have 6 states. That means the 3 biggest states cannot be outnumbered by the 3 smallest ones. It's a much more homogeneous country than Canada. And finally, they have a dispute settlement mechanism because the Prime Minister has the power to dissolve the 2 chambers, to send everybody in an election if they disagree. Senators, MPs who disagree, we have a stalemate, everybody go in election. The Prime Minister has this power, double dissolution power. And when they come back after the election, if they continue to disagree about the bill, joint decision. Where the members of Parliament by far outnumbered the number of senators. So this House remains more powerful than the Senate. It's what they have in Australia. C-7 does not fix it. Does not have any dispute settlement mechanism. No distribution of powers that would be new between the 2 chambers. I repeat, it's wrong. I'm still waiting for a counter-argument about that.
Thank you. Senator Brown.
Thank you. MP Dion is right when he says, not without a constitutional amendment on this piece of paper and in the bill, and the intent of the Prime Minister is not without a constitutional amendment. We are not going to change the Constitution of this country unless we follow the constitutional amendment. It's mentioned twice in there, and not only is it mentioned twice, it will be used twice. That's what the Prime Minister has seen himself, and he wrote me a letter on December the 12th and didn't have a single word to change it. And C-7, no matter skeleton of what the Alberta government has used 3 times. And I'm tired of people saying they're gonna have a reference to the Supreme Court. Why haven't they done it? In 3 separate elections, they've said they would do it, and they still haven't done it. Why don't they do it? The reason they don't do it is because the chief of the Supreme Court would say, you haven't got anything here. There's nothing that makes these people do this. This is an offer for them to do it. Unless you decide to make it a legal thing that they have to do without going to the court, then there's no reason to take up their time. The Supreme Court's got a lot of problems. They're not gonna do a reference on something that doesn't exist. They're just not going to. But Stephane Dion is wrong when he talks about down under in Australia. They do have the power to have a gridlock. In fact, they almost had dissolution of their parliament because the Senate was voting against something. We've looked at the mistakes made by all countries. We had 48 pages of the House of Lords, and they still got a big problem before they changed their things. What we're doing is making a time limit. We want the elections, we're telling the premiers of every election to put a cap on the amount of money they can spend. In New York, there's a woman that was elected 2 years ago to the Senate